If you think catcher depth is a minor storyline for the 2026 Cubs, you might be missing one of the most underrated engines behind their recent success. And this is the part most fans gloss over when they only focus on stars and big contracts. The 2025 Cubs quietly got strong, above-average contributions from almost every spot on the field, and catcher was no exception. Between Carson Kelly, Miguel Amaya, and Reese McGuire, the team's backstops combined for 4.2 FWAR, which is excellent output from a position that often leans defense first and light on offense. That type of steady, across-the-board production is exactly what turns a good roster into a legitimate contender over a full season. But here's where it gets interesting. Heading into 2026, that comfortable catching picture is not quite as stable. The state of the Cubs' catching depth. After the most recent non-tender deadline, Reese McGuire no longer occupies a spot on the Cubs' 40-man roster. That leaves the club poised to enter 2026 with Miguel Amaya and Carson Kelly as the primary catching tandem at the major league level. On paper, that looks fine, but the grind of a 162-game season usually exposes any lack of depth behind the top two options. The 2025 season already proved how valuable it is to have more than just a basic 1-2 catching setup. Injuries, cold streaks, and workload management can all force teams to tap into their third or even fourth catcher over the course of a year. That is why, even if Amaya and Kelly handle the bulk of the work, the Cubs still have every reason to build a safety net for 2026. Surveying the free agent catcher market. To understand the options, it helps to look at the group of free agent catchers and how they're valued in terms of projected contracts and performance. The market includes big names like JT Realmuto and a range of mid-tier and depth options such as Danny Jansen, Victor Caratini, Gary Sanchez, and, of course, Reese McGuire himself. Many of these players are coming off modest but useful seasons, with WAR totals mostly hovering around the 0.0 to 2.0 range. Some have already signed deals, often short-term contracts that reflect their roles as part-time starters or backups. Others remain available, projected for relatively small guarantees or minor league deals with an invitation to spring training. This is the tier where the Cubs are most likely to shop, rather than diving into the expensive end of the pool for a Realmuto-type signing. Could the Cubs reunite with Reese McGuire? It is entirely plausible that the Cubs explore bringing McGuire back on a minor league contract, similar to the deal Tomas Nido signed with Detroit. That type of arrangement would allow Chicago to keep an experienced catcher in the organization without immediately committing a 40-man spot. The upside is obvious. McGuire already knows the pitchers, the coaching staff, and the game plan. However, there is a twist that could complicate that scenario. McGuire's performance in 2025 may have elevated his stock enough that another club is willing to offer him a guaranteed major league backup role. If a team views him as a solid second catcher rather than just depth, he may not need to settle for a minor league pact. And this is the part most people miss. A minor role player can quickly price himself out of a former team's preferred risk range. What the Cubs really need from a depth catcher. The Cubs' ideal move is likely a minor league deal with a veteran who can be stashed at AAA but is capable of stepping into an MLB role at a moment's notice. That sounds simple, but the bar is higher than just, can catch the ball and hit a little. Chicago needs someone who can handle a pitching staff, manage the running game, and not sing the lineup when called upon. Because of that, the front office will be looking at more than just batting lines or surface-level stats. Defensive skills, especially those measured by framing and pop time, will matter a lot. The team will want someone who can immediately handle big league responsibilities if either Amaya or Kelly goes down, not just a warm body behind the plate. Framing versus pop time, the new balancing act. Here's where it gets controversial. What matters more in today's game for a backup catcher, stealing strikes or shutting down the running game? The answer is no longer obvious. Fangraphs framing metrics and StatCast pop time data highlight a real trade-off among many free agent catchers. Some excel at framing pitches and turning borderline calls into strikes, while others stand out for quick pop times that give them a better chance to catch would-be base stealers. With recent rule changes that encourage more aggressive base running, pop time has become significantly more valuable than it used to be. In practice, catchers who are elite at controlling the running game do not always rank as well in framing, and vice versa. One striking example from the free agent pool is JT Realmuto, who logs heavy innings and pops impressive times to second base but shows a negative framing number in the raw totals. Those framing figures are counting stats, meaning that the more innings a catcher works, the more those numbers can accumulate in either direction. Realmuto's low framing number, in part, reflects his massive workload compared with others. This raises a nuanced question: should the Cubs prioritize a catcher who can help their pitchers earn extra strikes, or someone who can better deter stolen bases in an era where the running game is surging back? Reasonable fans and analysts can disagree on that, and the front office likely views it as a balancing act rather than an either-or choice. Why Realmuto-level deals are unlikely. Even though Realmuto appears on the same free agent list as the more affordable names, it is highly improbable that the Cubs seriously enter that bidding. Projected cost, and opportunity cost all work against the idea of spending big on a veteran catcher when the team already has Amaya and Kelly in place. The organization's priorities likely involve allocating resources to other areas of the roster. So while Realmuto is a useful reference point for how to interpret framing and pop time metrics, especially given his massive innings total, he is more a hypothetical benchmark than an actual target. The Cubs' real choices are among the mid-level and lower-cost catchers who can complement, not replace, their current duo. The internal picture: Moises Ballesteros. Any discussion of catching depth has to include what is happening in the Cubs' own system. Moises Ballesteros, the rookie hitting sensation, technically lists catcher as his primary position. However, the way the Cubs use him in 2025 says a lot about how they view his long-term role. During his brief 20-game stint in the majors last season, Ballesteros logged only 6 innings behind the plate. That is an extremely small sample for someone whose official position is catcher. The team clearly prioritized getting his bat into the lineup rather than testing his defensive chops on a daily basis. Looking ahead to 2026, Ballesteros is far more likely to see most of his time at designated hitter. His experience at catcher still has value. It gives the Cubs a creative emergency option or a way to manage blowout games, but it does not look like the front office is planning around him as a regular defensive catcher. This is another subtle sign that they cannot simply count him as catching depth. The wild card, Owen S. Then there is Owen S., a name that many casual fans might not know but prospect watchers have started to circle. S turned heads during his stint in the Arizona Fall League with the Mesa Solar Sox, showing off an arm that scouts have described in almost cinematic terms. His exchange and release are electric, producing consistently fast throws to second that clock under 1.9 seconds, eye-popping for a developing catcher. S is a fascinating case because his defensive profile is lopsided at this stage. The arm is clearly impressive, but the rest of his catching defense is still a work in progress. He comes from a smaller school background, signed for a relatively modest bonus out of Marshall in 2024, and has spent 2 seasons at the single-A level. Offensively, he performed like an older-than-average hitter at low A and looked good in Arizona, though the pitching quality there can be uneven. He shows roughly average raw power but can be exposed by high velocity up in the zone. In other words, S has undeniably moved himself onto the prospect radar, but questions remain about what kind of big league role he might eventually fill. Will he refine his receiving skills enough to stick behind the plate full-time, or will his arm and bat push him into some sort of hybrid role? That uncertainty makes him exciting but also risky to pencil into any 2026 plans. YS is not the immediate answer. Even with his